So, I mean, to carry on the conversation last time about evolution, you know, really you can think whatever you want on evolution. How many new businesses do you think start a year? A lot, right? A lot of them don't make it. Some do. Some make it because they had great ideas. Some that don't make it had great ideas too. But through how, some way the system works, and everything set up the way it was, some made it and some didn't, in their environment. You may have been able to take that same business and put it in a different environment. Maybe instead of opening up in Antigonish, you opened up in Halifax. It could have been way different for you. But we always are operating in our environment, and that can have an effect. Some make it, some don't. Coronavirus will change. It evolves. Right? We've got all these different variants. Things are changing all the time, and different selection pressures will cause certain things to become more prevalent. Now you got to remember, coronavirus didn't evolve into Delta because it wanted to be more contagious. That's not how it works. The virus doesn't sit there and go, I want to be more contagious. Like, it doesn't do that. It's not, like, actively or consciously doing it. But think about the scenario. If something changes in a virus such that that change makes it a little bit more contagious, do you think that might help it exist? Do you think that might help it continue to spread? Probably, right? Therefore, you know, it's reasonable to expect, because here's the thing. The virus, it is evolving. It is changing all the time. Some of the changes make it useless. A lot of the changes will have no real effect. Some of them might make little differences that you never really notice, and some might do something where that, you know, it's a little bit more contagious. And within the environment that it exists, well, then it can spread more if it's more contagious. So there's like this selection pressure towards being more contagious. That's good for the virus. But again, the virus didn't it didn't decide. There's no malice involved. It's just a bunch of chemicals configured in a certain way such that this happens. And some of those chemicals change a little bit, therefore things change a little bit, and it's different. There's no one, though, pulling all the strings. All right. Are there any questions before I carry on? Not yet? Okay. So EC, it's inspired by the natural process of evolution. But remember, evolution, okay. Everything evolves. It's not just biology. What clothes are trendy evolves. What movies are popular will evolve. What hairstyles are popular will evolve. Back in my day, internet memes had a very strict structure. You know, there was like Velociraptor, Success Kid. They were very well defined. Today, anything could be a meme. But, you know, things just changed over time. It wasn't just like one day it happened. It just over time, things change. Everything evolves. Nothing can escape this process, this mechanism. Everything, whether it's biology, a cultural thing, a hairstyle, whatever, a business, everything. But we gotta be aware of the scales of evolution. You know, the changes might happen on an individual basis, right? maybe like, I don't know, I have a kid and they had a funny mutation so their eye color is orange. I don't know. Like that happens. But like, we wouldn't call that evolution. That's just one, like that's like an individual. We have to start thinking in terms of like populations, bigger. Like the changes might happen at the small scale, but evolution as a process is much bigger. And it's not even thinking about populations. We have to think about populations in their environment, competing with other populations, whatever that means in the context. Evolution is hard to think about because the levels of abstraction you need to consider are rather large. But everything is subject to evolution. What's popular on TV? Okay, environments are filled with populations. I'm probably going to be a little slide-ready during this particular set of slides. I apologize for that. So environments are filled with populations of individuals, and they're striving for survival and reproduction. And often a lot of people will be like, oh, your ability to reproduce is like a measure of like how good you are, right? Well, although that's true, it's not really an objective so much as a constraint. Because if I am something that doesn't have the ability to continue to exist, whether it's a rock that's just sitting there for millennia, or me who can pass on genes to children, if something exists and doesn't have the ability to continue to exist, then it won't exist. Think of that game of life example. How many of those configurations just died out? A lot of them. That's fine. So if they die out, okay, great. But being able to reproduce doesn't make it good. It's a constraint. If it doesn't have the ability to persist or reproduce, then there's nothing really magic going on at that specific thing. So fitness of the individual is determined by the environment and themselves. How well do they succeed in their goals? Represents chance of success in reproducing, whatever. Evolutionary computation as a metaphor. We have populations of candidate solutions. Candidate solution, I guess, is the technical term for any one of those 2D cars we saw. Each one was a candidate solution. They were all admissible, they were all cars, but some were better than others. And we could think of that whole population of them. Each one was a candidate solution, and together they're a population. The fitness, the quality, now I will be starting to blend some of the terminology. If we're really thinking with our biology hats and our biological evolution hats, the words that we are using, so the computer scientists stole a bunch of words and changed their meaning. Is anyone here did anyone here take a biological evolution course? One person. So, you and anyone else listening, if you were like, whoa, that's not what that means, take your biology hat off, pretend you never learned that stuff, and just be prepared for me to abuse all the terminology forever. So fitness, the word we use, fitness, is a candidate solution's measure of goodness. If it's a traveling salesman problem, that permutation, that's a candidate solution. Its fitness might be, well, what's its total length of that path? The fitness of that car, that two-dimensional car, how far did it make? Things that are more fit in evolutionary computation, we kind of want to give them a little bit of preferential treatment in our process, which kind of makes sense, right? Now, just because it's good doesn't mean it will necessarily reproduce. Just because you had a great business idea doesn't mean you're going to be successful. But, ones that have good ideas and are run well are probably more likely to succeed. So, if we're drawing parallel here, so in evolution, we could talk about an environment. Well, in terms of problem solving, the environment might be like the problem and the constraints that we are caring about. An individual, candidate solution, fitness, quality, goodness. Goodness is a terrible word, but I'm going to use it a lot. History. All right, I'm going to blitz through this. Alan Turing actually totally came up with the idea of evolutionary algorithms. Yeah, I'm just going to blitz through this. This history is interesting, but not particularly relevant. So given an environment that can support only a limited number of individuals, and that's kind of true, right? There's going to be like a capacity. Now, things might change within the environment. For example, if you go back in human history, before we figured out like farming and baking bread, there was like a capacity of our environment, right? Like there were some limitations. But then, we figured out like agriculture, and all of a sudden, like the number of individuals that like a city could hold would go up quite a bit. Okay, finite resources. And individuals have a basic instinct to reproduce, let's say. So selection will become inevitable. If we have a limited supply of stuff, and there's this level of competition, of competing, there's going to be some preferential treatment that might arise. But really, it's like these selection pressures. Sometimes things that arise via evolution have fantastic benefits. Hands, they're great. Hair on top of your head. I don't know. Maybe it keeps you slightly warmer and that's important. I don't know. There are certain birds out there that have, like think of a peacock. Or some birds do these like crazy little mating dances, right? You're all aware of that stuff. Do you think the mating dance or the peacock's feathers have some real good physical goodness other than just attracting a partner? There probably is, right? But we do know that a lot of these things, their purpose, it seems, is to attract a partner, which is clearly going to be important for the ability to reproduce. But does it have any other mechanism that makes it good in its environment? Maybe. But maybe it doesn't need to be, because it was just something that was able to attract a partner to be able to reproduce, and that's ultimately a good thing. If that helped you reproduce to let your genes live on, great. So selection becomes inevitable, otherwise the population gets too big. Limited resources, people are going to have to compete for resources. There's going to be some way where things get differentiated. The bigger, stronger, Jabberwockies can reproduce more because they're well-fed. I don't know. Natural selection favors individuals that compete most effectively, survive longer, maybe have more babies. Survival of the fittest. Yeah, that's not really a great way to put it, though, because the fittest it can get confusing. Competition based on selection is one of the two important ideas, and the other one is variation. So we've got a limited capacity. We have competing for resources. And we also need a mechanism for change. Little changes. We don't want to make huge changes. Like think of the Game of Life example where I just started throwing dots everywhere. It was chaos, right? Cool. But if you're looking at a single thing and I make one little change, and we see it, maybe it starts acting a little differently, right? Like we saw that little square that I put a new dot next to it. It turned into like one of those like lines that just kept flipping. The square is interesting, but if I leave it alone, it'll continue to persist, but no real variations being included, so nothing's going to change. If we start introducing these little changes, that square might die off and disappear. Maybe that change was catastrophic to the thing. Or maybe that change made it change into something else, that little thing that flip-flopped back and forth. All right, so genotype. So we have our genotype. That's like my DNA. That's my genes, okay? It is an encoding that gets decoded somehow into me. okay? Through a whole bunch of crazy processes. But then we also have the phenotype. The phenotype is me. The genes are my genotype, but ultimately, if you follow all the instructions that are encoded in my genotype, you get me, the phenotype. I am the manifestation of my gene, like I am the phenotype. You all have your own genotypes, and you all are existing in human, so that's the difference. When we were talking about direct and indirect encodings last time, sometimes the encoding, the genotype and the phenotype are fairly close to each other, like the permutation of cities is the order in which you hit the cities. If I encode my problem, or if I encode a solution to my problem as a permutation of cities, that encoding, that genotype, is very similar to the phenotype. But if I'm talking about that N queens example where I think of a permutation instead of that two-dimensional board, suddenly those things seem a little bit further apart. We have diverse phenotypes. Look at us. We're all different. Diversity is also a very good thing in evolutionary computation. We like variation. We like a mechanism to, we like when there's a way that variation gets introduced, but also having differentness. If we, look, we're all human. We're all reasonably good at existing as humans right now. Would you agree? I'm not expecting to drop dead right in a minute, right? So we're all pretty good. But the point is we're all different, right? I mean, genetically we're very, like our genotypes are similar, but there's enough difference that our phenotypes are different. We all have different traits and things. Some of them are like hair color, okay? Doesn't, how much is that gonna matter? Some of it will kind of matter, like eye color. We do know, okay, well, the amount of melanin in your eye. I have blue eyes. When I go outside, I'm blind all the time. That's why I'm always wearing sunglasses. Some people, they don't really, the sun doesn't bother them too much. Whatever. We have these variations, but we all work. We're all human, but we all work well as humans. So if we're all different, but we're all good, that variation might have some advantage on a population level. Imagine tomorrow, I'm looking at you, Ethan. Imagine tomorrow the ozone disappears and it's a really sunny day. You and I, we're going to die. We're done. We're done, right? But other people will be fine, right?
I'll fry indoors.
Yeah. I might not fry as quick as you, but I'm going to fry pretty quickly. Point is, individuals might die off, but the population is kind of protected by that variation, right? There's going to be a bunch of people where like, oh, okay, well, they'll probably die of sun cancer eventually if there's no protection from all those rays, but they'll survive longer than us. So that variation might have some underlying benefits. Some of the variation is useless. The fact that my nose is this big and your nose is that big, whatever. And some of them might have some interesting traits that are different. In the wintertime, I can go outside and get enough vitamin D in like 20 seconds, right? But other people need a little bit more sunlight to get enough vitamin D. So that's where we get vitamin D well in the winter. It's just we burn up in the sun if we stay longer than 30 seconds.
If an ice age comes around, we're set.
Yeah, there we go. So these differences can get propagated, inherited. Mutations can occur between generations, small little things that might be seemingly inconsequential. New combinations come together, and the best survive to reproduce. Again, there's asterisks here, but just high level, this is the idea. So, a population consists of many individuals. Individuals are subject to selection, how well they exist in the environment relative to the rest of the population. Goodness is always a relative metric, right? I might be better than you, but they might be better than me. And like if I'm searching for the best permutation of cities. I don't know what the best is, but I can tell you which ones are better than other ones. So these are relative things. A successful phenotype reproduces. Small mutations, new individuals can arise. Over time, the population changes as a whole. Populations evolve. Individuals will have little changes, but it's the population over a long period of time will change. We all have two hands. Notice that there is no guiding force behind any of this. Yes. Other than the mechanisms talked about, there's no one picking and choosing. Humans are going to evolve hands now. Like that doesn't happen. It's just it's just those mechanisms. There's more at play, but at a high level, it's those mechanisms. There is no invisible hand here pushing it along. It's just the processes that are happening within these constraints. And those constraints exist in this environment, so this is where it goes. Landscape, okay, the X and Y plane holds all possible combinations of features. We were talking about this already. Pretend this is our fitness landscape. The search space of X and Y values. And that third dimension, I guess, going up is like its goodness. An individual would be a point on that plane, let's say. If I'm looking for the best combination of X and Y, but let's pretend I don't see that plot. Okay, I don't know what the search space really looks like, but I'm looking for an X and a Y, such that I maximize whatever the Z value is in this three-dimensional plot. I could ask you to start yelling out 2D points. 7 and 14, -2 and 7. Doesn't matter. Each one of those might be a candidate solution. It's a very simple problem, something you wouldn't want to use evolutionary computation for. But we can generate a population of all these points, and then whichever one has the best value based on just whatever the function that generated this is, that's good. The population would be the whole collection of points. Local optimum, that might be like a little, I don't know. The global optimum is going to be the big point. Local optimum might be good points, but are only relatively good. And the trouble with local optimum is they can be misleading. Like we were talking about the other time, if I'm looking for the warmest part in the room, if I start following and I get to a point that's really warm right here, and then any other point here, it's a little bit cooler, great, but maybe the hottest part of the room's over there. But I can't really tell from here. I kind of got stuck in this local optimum. There was no clear, consistent gradient for me to follow from where I am to the best spot. It's a complicated space. Some search spaces are nice and convex or concave, meaning that you just follow the hill until you find the minimum or the maximum. Yeah?
In the last slide, you talked about, and it makes sense for natural biology, that there's no guiding factor behind the changes. When you're actually talking about like the evolutionary algorithm, how can they evolve if they follow the same principles? How are they expected to evolve on their own? Isn't like the person who's designing the algorithm going to look at the changes and make the changes?
Well, the things that we're going to cover all, like, I swear, we're eventually going to talk about an algorithm. We're getting there. We will set up the constraints and the rules and let evolution do its thing based on the constraint and the rules. And we'll observe. And hopefully we see things like populations improve over time until we find like a really good solution.
So I guess the natural follow-up question is, are computers like pretty dumb? Like how is it going to make the changes on its own? Explicitly saying make the changes.
So we will describe how the changes could occur. We'll see all this.
Okay.
So with everything I'm saying, yeah, asterisk, right? Because it's like, yeah, there's no force behind it. We're totally going to design it such that we are guiding it in a certain way. But yeah, and yeah.
I know obviously you have like the local and optimums and stuff. Can you avoid that scenario of finding the local optimum with the cold areas say all around it by not having an optimization function and kind of just blundering through the search space and then hoping?
So, whether you realize it or not, you asked a very, 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 very interesting question. So we can take the dumbest strategy and do like a random search. No real, just go. And just have all these points moving around sporadically and just testing stuff. And yeah, that's fine. A random search is fine. But with evolutionary computation, there's a little bit of like a force in a certain direction. There are a lot of algorithms similar to evolutionary computation, right? Like AI, heuristic, machine learning, neural network, all that. And they all have their own strategies for how to avoid these types of things. With evolutionary computation, you'll have a population, right? So I might have a point that's in a local optimum, but hopefully not all of my points are in that local optimum. We want to have a nice population, and that's why diversity is important. If I have all the points that are all very, very similar, yeah, they'll get stuck in that optimum. And then we lose the ozone and everyone dies of skin cancer like that, So we need that diversity. Global optimum best. Genetic drift. This is the population moving throughout the landscape. And yeah, did you have a follow-up?
Kind of follow-up, yeah. So for questions that are more open-ended, as opposed to don't die of skin cancer, what do humans need to do that? Would those be better off sometimes than up, right? Or I guess it maybe just depends on what you're asking and what you have available to you.
So there have been like simulation experiments done that we could totally talk about later in the course, where they don't even have a problem being solved, to solve. What they did is they just created an environment. They made it so there was like some limiting capacity and a finite amount of resources and a couple of like little mechanisms for change, okay? And they just hit run and let it go. So they weren't looking to solve anything in particular. In fact, there are certain algorithms that there are certain evolutionary algorithms out there that don't even like try to optimize so much as what they're optimizing isn't their ability to solve a problem, it's their ability to be diverse. And a lot of these come up in areas where, and I know why you're asking this question, a lot of these come up in areas where, yeah, they're like TSP, okay, there's an obvious way to measure goodness. But in some problems, there isn't. On Earth, what's goodness? What are humans optimizing for? Nothing. We aren't optimizing anything. We reproduce and we just keep doing our thing. Why? I don't know, because we're here. No one's stopped us yet. We haven't killed ourselves off yet. It'll happen. So, if you do these simulations, you'll just observe things happening. And eventually, it's kind of like the game of life example where, you have these changes. And what might arise is things that can then persist. If they don't have the ability to persist or reproduce, then, it won't exist. You got it. Something I like to think about is how many processes are there out there happening right in front of me that are interesting, but just not interesting enough to be noticed? You ever think about that? How many patterns and numbers maybe have you noticed where you're like, oh, that looks like something's here, but whatever. So it wasn't interesting enough to really get noticed, but it was still an interesting set of processes. So you could figure, if I started the game of life, there might be a lot of interesting magic going on, but if you let it run forever, maybe that particular configuration does stop, and all the points die off. Okay, great. So it was interesting, but it didn't quite have a configuration that was interesting enough to create a little glider that would go on forever. So we only care, like, there's got to be a good way to explain this, and of course I'm drawing a blank right now. We only noticed the thing because it matched our expectation of something interesting. But that doesn't mean that process that game of life configuration that didn't persist wasn't interesting, wasn't following the same set of rules. It was just we didn't notice it based on our definition of what would be interesting. And in our case, what's interesting is something that persists or can reproduce. I'm explaining this poorly. I'm not going to think on this to come up with a better way of articulating it. Every year I go through this. Every year I go, oh, how do I explain this good? Then I come up with a really good explanation. Then I explain it. And then the next year I go, crap, what was it? So I'll have to think on that one a little bit. Yeah?
Could you maybe think of it as like the instances of
I guess it would be similar to that, right? Whenever in stats and we're doing p-values, everyone knows that magic alpha value is 0.05, right? Right? Or maybe you haven't taken, I don't know. Whatever, we always want to find 0.05. If our data has, that p-value tells us that the difference in the distribution appears to be less than 0.05, oh, it's significant, right? Why 0.05 though? Because some guy was like, 0.05. And it's funny because in some fields of science, they won't even tell you the p-value, they'll just be like, it was significant, right? But it's like, but who defined that? Then based on that significance level, it's a 1 in 20 chance that it was a bullshit observation, which is also terrible, right? That means like 1 in 20 papers out there that are like, oh, it was significant. One of them is entirely incorrect based on that value. And then there are other disciplines that are like, based on my p-value of 1.17 times 10 to the negative 38, they're different. If I'm reading that paper, I go like, yeah, they are. There's a chance, no chance, Anyway. I gotta think of a better way to explain there might be something interesting happening right in front of me right now.
The lake.
Pardon?
Like a lake with mist over it and you're on the stepping stones.
Yeah.
And you can go left on the stepping stones, or you can go right, or you can go straight. And straight you think gets you to the shore faster, but it could be like a light bulb and you're going at it from the other end, you might hit the shore faster if you go left.
Yeah, because you don't know. And I know where you got that example from. There's a really good book you all should read called The Myth of the Objective. Is that what it's called? Yeah. The Myth of the Objective. It's an evolutionary computation book that is just straight up a good life advice book.
It's 90 pages.
Oh,
you get through it in a day or a day and a half.
And despite being a science book, it's probably the easiest read ever.
There's nothing. There's no code or CS fancy stuff.
It's a very good book to get you to just kind of change the way you think about everything. In a good way. It's really interesting. It's written by a very famous evolution computation person. Anyways, genetics, phenotype, that's the outside. Genotype, the inside. I'm being very imprecise. Yes?
What's the name of the book again?
The Myth of the Objective. That's the subtitle, though. Greatness cannot be planned.
Yeah.
The Myth of the Objective.
And the picture on the front's a butterfly rainbow thing.
Yeah, it's this funny butterfly. Stanley, Ken Stanley, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It only writes so fast. So what's the title?
Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. The Myth of the Objective. You know what?
Google.
Look at that. Yeah, here it is. Here it is on Amazon. Highly recommend this book. It's so good. Oh, no. I've lent my copy out to someone. Is that person here right now? Strike two. I know. This happened the other day, too. I gotta move quick, too, because this computer will warn me 2 seconds before it crashes. Aha. All right. Well, I lent my version of this book out to someone. I hope I get it back one day. I have one copy of my honors thesis, right? I mean, you would only have one copy of that. And I lent it out to someone last year or the year before. It's gone. And there's a small set of people I would have lent it to, and they're like, no, I don't have it. So that book is gone forever. It was one of a kind. Anyways. All right. Genotype encodes phenotype. Genes can be passed to offspring. Alleles is a value that a gene can have. I'm sorry, biologists. Yeah. One gene can affect multiple phenotypic traits. So a gene might be one of the cities, right? But if you change one of the positions of one of the cities, that could have catastrophic effects on the phenotype, right? The total, path, One phenotype can be affected by more than one gene, yep. Okay, a genome, that's complete genetic info for an individual. Okay, this is, no. Okay, crossover. I'm sorry, biologists. This isn't how it works in biology. But in evolutionary computation, it's about somehow combining the features from two individuals to form offspring. The idea is, imagine I had a good car. in that 2D example, that 2D driving example. And another good car. They're both good, but they're different. I want to be able to have them reproduce together and create offspring that are similar to the parents, but different, and hopefully still good, if not better. Maybe worse. In fact, a lot of times they're worse. If they don't die, though, who cares? Great. If they persist, wonderful. So the idea is, if this is good, if this order of cities is good, and this order of cities is good, maybe if I mash them together and pull them apart, I'll get a new set of orderings that are also good. Maybe they're terrible. I don't know. Most of the time, they'll be terrible. This is a silly example. Imagine you had one bar that is entirely white and one bar that is slightly not white. I guess this is like the genes doing it. They split, cell division or whatever. And look, these ones, we combined, they crossed over. That's the idea. This is stupid without computer science context. Yeah, we have DNA. Okay, yeah, we go from the genotype to the phenotype. We might not necessarily be able to, it might not be a nice one-way function, though, right? Maybe multiple genotypes can give you the exact same phenotype. And then how the heck would you go back? Yeah.
So are phenotypes unique then? In the sense that if you can put in multiple genotypes, potentially put in multiple genotypes to get one phenotype?
Well, imagine like TSP. I could have the exact same permutation in reverse.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So that's an example. They are entirely different, but they mean the same thing. Right? Phenotype does not affect genotype. Yeah. Things that you learn isn't inherited. All right. I learned that 1 + 1 is 2. I have a 1-year-old at home. I don't think he knows 1 + 1 is 2. Yeah. Oh, and then selection is based on the phenotype level. Like the genes aren't competing so much as the manifestation of what they mean are competing. Some argue that viewing evolution from the perspective of genes is more productive. Think about the gene pool competing to replicate, if you like. Okay, each newborn individual is a new sample point. If I did that crossover, if I had 2 cars, 2 TSP permutations, mix them together, pull them apart, they're new data points. Maybe they come out, in an unlikely case, they come out exactly the same as their parents. That could happen, but they're still new members of the population. They're still new there, they're still there. Whatever. Oh, yeah, there's the baby, there it is. It's right there. YEC. Nature is brilliant at problem solving, especially when there's not really a problem being solved. For example, what problem are humans solving right now? I mean, we're solving a bunch of problems, but unless our universe is a simulation that some great programmer created for us to solve a traveling salesman problem, I don't know. Unless that exists, we're not really being used to solve a given, we're not optimizing anything, we're just doing our thing.
We're creating problems.
We create problems and we solve problems. I'm cold. I should build a house. Yeah, great. That was solving a problem, but that's not really what I mean here. Nature really has only one super powerful algorithm, evolution. You see, it's simple, it's easy. Oh, this is okay. When I learned, I'm gonna let you all in a secret that I'm actually a super lazy person. When I was doing my undergrad degree, what I particularly liked was like the more heavy duty, for lack of a better term, like the more theoretical stuff, the more mathy computer science stuff. I really liked it. But then I wanted to do an honors thesis, and I was speaking to different potential supervisors, different professors. And one of them was far and away like a more mathy one. And the project I almost worked on was something called fuzziness, which is awesome. But I won't go into those details, but I almost went into this much more formal stuff. But I just so happened to speak to a number of other professors. One professor explained the stuff that they were doing. And they use evolutionary computation. And then I spoke to another professor, the professor that ended up being my supervisor, Sheridan. She explained what she was doing, and I got really excited about it because she was really good at selling it. Not to say that the work isn't interesting. It's just she did a really good job at explaining what it was. Funny enough, her and the previous one, not the theory one, were actually explaining the exact same thing, except she explained it so much better that I got excited about it. And so I learned a little bit about evolutionary computation, and then I realized, like, wait a minute, I can just do this and people will call me smart for doing this? Amazing. So one of the benefits of evolutionary computation is it's so simple. It is so simple, but it works. We like simplicity. I do. If evolutionary computation was more complicated, I wouldn't do it. So we like it because it's simple. And even better, if we are solving a problem of like TSP, here's what I need to know. I need to know how a GA works, okay? How an evolutionary algorithm works, a basic evolutionary algorithm. I know that I need permutations, and I want them to be able to, like, each permutation can reproduce, cross over, and just hit run, let that go for like millions of iterations where you've got these candidate solutions, you evaluate which ones are good, you let them have offspring, you repeat. At the end of the day, you'll get pretty good answers. I don't really know anything about TSP though. Like, I know what the problem is. There's probably like 1,001 tips and tricks that you could learn about TSP to find, like tricks to find good solutions. I don't care. The GA will figure it out. That's where I like this stuff, because I can be so lazy. Finding nonlinear relationships in fMRI data? Think I have any idea how to do that? I don't need to. My evolutionary algorithm will figure it out. And it did. It's awesome. Yeah, we can also study evolution simulation, whatever. What happens if we test incest? Well, we can do that in simulation. We don't like to do that in real life. What happens if offspring need 3 parents? Well, that doesn't really work in our world, but maybe we can make that work in simulation. How does that change how it works? So why? Well, it's not as constrained by other conventions or just preferences or anything. It's so simple. So here, I'm trying to remember what this particular example was. Shoot, response point, force point. Crap, do I have notes in this slide? Oh, okay, perfect. This is what it was. So, okay, yeah. Because we've got like CAD software and physics simulations and whatnot. So here's like some like metal scaffolding that I can build, okay? And I don't know, there's a forcing point, response point. I don't really know what those means. All that means is there's this structure. It's got like some rigidness and structure to it. But turns out with evolution, they found this particular configuration, which is like 20,000 times stronger or just better on whatever metric they were using. Don't ask me for the fine details of this particular problem because I don't remember if it wasn't obvious. But the point is this configuration's better. Would you look at that and be like, yeah, obviously? No. No engineer in their right mind would go like, yeah, I'm going to design it this way because it's going to be better. No. No one would have designed this. But someone like evolutionary algorithms found it because evolutionary algorithms didn't have a preconceived notion of like, well, we like things to look like this. If you tell a human to build like a structure to do whatever this is doing, they're probably going to build something that looks a lot like this, because this is what these look like in our world. Every one I've ever seen, like maybe it's a small little radio tower, I don't know. They all look kind of like that, more or less. So you're going to design that. The GA doesn't know. The genetic algorithm doesn't know. The evolutionary algorithm doesn't know. So when we tell it to solve the problem, it came up with this, which no one would have come up with, because the algorithm was not biased by preconceived ideas. This is another big win for certain types of AI, machine learning, and whatnot. Is this not perverted by preconceived biases? And another really cool thing, a really cool thing is, if done right, cool, we find this wonderful configuration, and it works really well. Right? So now if I'm an engineer and I go, okay, great, I'll just build this now. And you build it, and it's doing its job. But inevitably there's going to be some asshole in the room that's going to go, but why is it better? Right? Great. Well, we have this. Maybe we can now reverse engineer and actually answer that question. Where before, if I didn't have this, I would never think, if I didn't have this and know it was really good, I would never think to reverse engineer, like, I would never think to come up with the reasons why this would be good if I didn't have something that was good. Does that make sense? I got this good thing and I go, oh crap, why is it so good? And then I find out. If I was just operating in this world with those preconceived biases and I just designed that little radio tower or something, I would never have discovered this. So another benefit too is not only getting the result that you're looking for, but potentially learning something about the system as a consequence. So like, oh, turns out, this is great. Same idea with the antenna. Great, this antenna is fantastic, but why? And then we learn something. So we win again. We get this amazing thing, and then all of a sudden we can find out why that amazing thing's good, and we learn something new. Yeah.
So is evolutionary conservation ethical for practices like medicine? Like if it has kind of like a black box way of working where like you don't actually know what's going on, but you're like, it works. Like for detecting stuff in an MRI or whatever. Wouldn't the physician want to know like why it's doing it so it can make sure that it's doing it in a way that's like safe?
Yeah, and absolutely. In fact, if we're talking about the complexity about it, so a lot of times evolutionary algorithms can be explainable, and sometimes they can't be. And if they can't be, it's that example I always use. If my black box algorithm tells me to suggest this YouTube video next, and my boss comes and says, why? And I say, because it made us another $1 billion, they go, great. If they say, if I go to my boss and say, hey, my black box says do neurosurgery on this person immediately, and my boss says, but why? I can't say, because it's right most of the time, right? That's not an option. Now, if I'm doing some analytics with data and whatnot, maybe I'm doing some simple data visualization, regression analysis, some simple machine learning algorithms, great. That's one extreme. We want to operate in this world. At the other extreme, we've got our evolutionary computation. We've got our neural networks. We don't want to use these things. All right, there's that. Next time, it looks like we will actually talk about an algorithm.